By far the most terrifying instance was when I was in my college dorm. It was dark in the scene, and the only lighting from the room was a thin sliver of light that came from the hallway through the bottom opening of the door. I was sleeping in the scene, and then woke up suddenly as if from a nightmare. I tried catching my breath and collecting myself to go back to sleep. Once I put my head down, my heart sank when I suddenly heard heavy breathing, and I looked over at my roommate thinking it was him and put my head down again, but it kept getting closer and louder. In my uneasiness, I scanned the room with my eyes only to see a tall, shadowy figure in the right corner, and he began laughing hysterically in a distorted and demonic fashion. I tried to scream and yell for my roommate, but I had no voice. A sudden force then laid me flat on my bed, and no matter how much I tried to get up, I couldn't. I peer over and watch the figure jump onto my roommate and literally and brutally tear him limb from limb. I try to avert my gaze, but it made me watch. I can still remember the sound of my friend choking on his own blood as he was devoured alive. Realizing that this was likely sleep paralysis, I tried to collect myself and kept saying it was almost over. But the figure now looking at me, slowly approaching my stiff body, began touching my still face with its bloody, wrenched, bony fingers. It licked my cheek and started screaming things in my ear while surrounding laughter crushed my body, and before it could escalate, it was over. This dream is the most vivid dream I've ever had, as well as the most terrifying. It begins at the edge of a clear pond on a clear summer night. The sky is free of clouds, and only the full moon is casting its light down upon the crystal clear pond. The water is only about 6 inches deep, and I'm standing at the edge underneath some of the pine trees in the forest which surround the pond. By my side is my father and a silent Native American. We're all staring solemnly down at the perfectly round pebbles of all shapes and colors which make up the bottom of this mystic pond. I wade out into the water about 20 feet, and it is no deeper than it was at the edge of the pond. I'm looking down at the stones when a liquid red light suddenly bathes the water and everything around me. I can hardly describe the beauty of this light. I can only say that it left no shadows and did not fall upon, but instead permeated everything it touched. I turned to the Indian and my father with amazement of this light. Silently, the Indian turns and walks back into the forest. My father's eyes are looking up above me, and so I turn around to look where he's gazing. The moon is gone now, and there are so many enormous pentagon shapes which look essentially like nuts, as in nuts and bolts, moving towards each other. It's obvious that there is a predetermined shape, that they are all coming together in a chain to form in the sky. I'm in awe at the beautiful way that they move together, and at the beautiful red light that is being emitted from them, and the area that they are forming into. As the shape begins to assemble, I realize it's essentially the shape of an eye stalk, which is large at the base and gets skinnier as it curves back and then forwards and down towards me. I look back to my dad, who is now looking at me with his eyes that convey that there is nothing he can do or will do. He looks absolutely frightened. I sense the shape of the object, and I realize it's coming towards the back of my head. As I realize this, I feel myself pulled backwards, but from the inside out. It's as if my hands gently reached inside my head and are pulling me up from the bottom of my brain. It does not hurt, but I feel intense vertigo and fear, and with the adrenaline I snap awake and feel myself fall back into my body. I remained very scared after I woke up, but after the adrenaline wore off I began to realize what a profound dream that was. Possibly almost an out-of-body experience as well. Who knows what would have happened to me if I were to let that shape take me. For any of you who have ever seen the movie Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan with Leonardo DiCaprio acting as the central character, you'll have no difficulty at all relating to my dream. However, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of watching this movie, I'll have to provide a quick summary of these parts that pertain to this particular dream of mine. Essentially, the movie is about being able to go into dreams of other people. One of the complications of this is, however, increasing confusion as to tell which is the real world and what is a dream world. I won't ruin the movie as a whole for you, but I can tell you that this becomes quite convoluted. With that said, my dream involves a similar distortion of reality and dream. The other day, I was taking a long and luxurious nap. At least I was trying to do so. Every few minutes, one of the people I live with, there are 3 in total, would do something obnoxiously loud and either wake me up or simply prevent me from falling asleep. If the disturbance continued for more than a few seconds, then I would proceed to get out of bed and nicely ask the perpetrator to try to be a bit more quiet. However, no matter how much I politely pleaded or tried to block out the various sleep-depriving noises, they continued. Eventually, my alarm went off and I was forced to get up. Needless to say, I was a bit frustrated that my nap had been ruined, so I confronted my roommates later about all the lack of consideration. They had no idea what I was talking about. As it turns out of the dozens of rude awakenings and starts that I had experienced, the only one that was real was the last one right before my alarm clock went off. The seamlessness of which my dream had flowed into reality, and the detail of that dream had me completely convinced that it was real. In fact, 2 days later, I'm still pinching myself every couple of minutes to try to make sure that what I'm experiencing is reality and not just another realistic dream. It's honestly very disconcerting to not know reality from a dream, and as I've found, can lead to some awkward encounters. Maybe there's some foolproof method to see if you're dreaming or not, but I haven't found it yet. Without it, I fear my life may dissolve into a replica of Nolan's Inception, which those of you who have seen it know will be more than a little bit strange. In my dream, I had just awoken from my sleep with the sudden urge to pee. It was still very early in the morning because upon checking my phone, I saw that it was only about 5 a.m. and the sun hadn't even risen yet. So I make my way down the dorm hallway and find that all the doors were closed, a sight that I had never come across before. Never before have I seen such emptiness, nor have I heard such a chilling silence. I find this rather eerie, so I move quickly to the bathroom door. I slide the door open, and I remember distinctly how loud the door screeched. Why haven't I ever noticed the sound it made before? It was at this moment that I realized I've been watching too many horror movies. But despite my fears and suspicions, there was no greater motivation than for me to go pee. So I make my way to the stalls, looking to myself in the mirror to reassure myself that no ghosts or demons would suddenly appear behind me like they do in the movies. I also have this deathly fear that once I turn away and look back at the mirror, some demon would pop out at the second glance. It's because of this fear that I never take my eyes off the mirror, not even while peeing. Unfortunately, with all my attention placed on the mirror, I completely neglect the open window near the stall closest to the wall. And the second I turned my head to inspect the open window, a child's head popped out and screamed. I remember his face distinctly. He had black hair, his eyes were completely white, and his face a grayish blue. He had no scars, but his shriek was piercingly loud and high, and he was clawing for me like I was his victim. And then I woke up. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this man sitting on the edge of my bed. He told me to join him, or I would face the consequences. I didn't know what that meant. I had this dream when I was about 10, so of course I said I wouldn't join him. He suddenly got very angry and started yelling, so I dove under my covers. When I was brave enough to peek out, he was gone. So I went to tell my parents. I walked down the hall, but it wasn't them. It was 2 completely random people sitting in my parents' bed. They told me to join them, as the man had, but I was terrified. Somehow, I knew at this point I was in a dream, and I had decided I needed to wake up. I ran back to my bed and closed my eyes hundreds of times. I woke up. Now the door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, and I could see my younger brother walking down the hallway. A light was on from the bathroom, and all I could see was the back of his head, and it looked exactly like him. So I ran to give him a hug. I was so relieved. But the boy turned around, and it wasn't my brother. So I tried again, and again, and again to wake up. It never was my actual family. It never was anyone I knew. It was so much worse than it sounds, especially since every time I, quote, woke up, it was a different stage of the night, or a different bedroom sometimes. When I actually did wake up, for real, I went to my parents' room again and saw that it was them there. I cried because I was so happy that it was over. It all started normally. I was walking around my tiny hometown with my cousin, and we visited some friends and went swimming. Then my mom and a few other people picked us up for a trip. As we started driving, the scenery was like an oil painting of desert mountains and sunset. When we arrived at our destination, it was dark. I stood with them all, looking down from a ridge and into a valley filled with pale, square houses. They were plain and looked relatively normal, if not unnervingly uniform. There was a restaurant with its lights on in the midst of the houses, so we decided to go for dinner. I lingered a little longer and for some reason could see some of the roofs of the houses, one in particular. I thought it was strange before that I couldn't see any of the people, but now in the center of this house was a little boy in a black monk-like robe with a black band across his mouth. It didn't even look like tape. It was just as if there was nothing there. Emptiness. He was wriggling. I grew unsettled and ran after my family into the valley for dinner. At the restaurant, it was filled with these black-draped people, all with black across their mouths. More emptiness. And it was silent. At the counter, I asked the chef which chicken was better, and he responded by glaring and throwing hot oil on me. One of the young men seated at the table got up and tried to yell at the chef through his covered mouth, but guards immediately came in and took him outside. I could hear the gunshots. That's when my group ran for our vehicle. When we got there, though, a man dressed in white with black across his mouth was trying to steal our car. In panic mode, I tackled him to the ground. The guards picked him up, and immediately I realized what I had done and started crying, telling him I was sorry. He ended up ripping the black from his face and was bloody and raw, and told me that it was better this way. And that's when I woke up. I remember waking up for no reason whatsoever. No loud noise, no touching on my body that makes me wake up, just complete silence. I sat up, just thinking to myself that maybe I was really thirsty, or I had to piss or something. But there was this feeling, it was just very odd. A feeling I've never had before. I can't even explain the feeling, but certain people know this exact feeling I'm talking about. If I had to put it into words, all I would say is pure dread. I felt as if time simply didn't exist. I almost felt like the entire world just stopped. It even felt like my clock was frozen in time. I remember sitting up in a daze. As I sat up, I turned my head to the left of me, looking out of my bedroom doorway. As I peeked through, I saw a man standing there just staring back at me. He had to be around 7 feet tall, and I'm not even joking here. This man wasn't hollow-looking at all. No ghostly look. He looked like a human, completely solid, just standing there staring at me. I remember seeing the details in the clothes and everything. He had on all black boots, kinda like Doc's, faded blue jeans, and a huge puffy jacket. Very odd, since it was the middle of summer, and even at night it can still be very warm in California. The jacket had a hood that was over his head. The odd thing is that I could not see his face at all. Even with the dim blue light lighting him up, his face was just black. No facial features or anything. Just a complete dark void where his face was supposed to be. As I sat there staring at him, I was just frozen. Not making a sound, I was washed over with this confusing feeling mixed with fear. I remember both of us just looking at each other for what seemed like minutes, but was most likely only about 30 seconds. As I was looking at him, I just felt terrified. I remember all of a sudden just knocking out. I was staring at him and then just slowly laid back down. Then nothing, just KO'd instantly. Complete darkness. I was walking through a thick cloud of smoke. I looked around me to find Native Americans smoking from their pipes, and I breathed the smoke into my lungs. As I walk, I come to a fire. It felt like a celebration or ceremony was about to take place, and there stood a great man with a long headdress of beautiful feathers. He handed me a small axe and showed me a pig lying on the ground. I could not understand him, but I knew what he wanted me to do, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to kill this pig. I threw the axe across the fire, and it transformed into a sword and struck into the ground. I was ashamed. I walked over to the sword and grabbed the blade, but the chief walked over and took my arm to lead me to a teepee of all different colors nearby. I heard a man singing inside, and the chief left me there outside of the teepee. I remember being scared to go in. As I gathered the courage and made my way inside, he stopped singing and looked at me, and then the blood dripping from my hand. Others that were there began leaving, and he showed me the seat next to him, as if telling me to sit down. He poured earth into my wound, and then handed me a small brown leather bag. Inside was a necklace with a red rock. I left him, and the others were waiting outside. I went off by myself and stared at this necklace. After a while, I put it on and made my way back out to the fire. The chief saw me and my new necklace, and I had a sense that this should not be mine. The chief spoke, and everyone listened. They all got up and started to dance, moving the earth. I couldn't help it, but I started to dance too. I danced as hard as I could, not caring of anything else. It was getting really late, and they started to leave one by one, but I kept dancing and dancing until I fell to the ground in exhaustion. As I woke up, it was still dark. The fire was still strong, and I gaze across the fire to see the shaman sitting there staring at me. He gets up with grace and stands with his back to me. He turns around as if asking me to follow him, and walked away. I quickly followed behind. The sun was starting to come up by the time we reached the river, and then he spoke to me, and he could speak English. He told me that water is life. He explained that water had no great beauty or didn't smell like a flower, but yet the flowers and all the wonders of life depend on its presence. He jumped into the water and looked like a colorful fish swimming in the light. I jumped in after him, and as we came up for air, I was laughing. The water felt so good. He took some in his hands for me to drink, and it was the best water I'd ever tasted. We left the river and began walking through the grassy meadows nearby. He stopped to pick up some of the dirt and laid it in my hands. I let it run through my fingers, and I buried my feet in the dirt and laid down in it, burying my hands in as well. I realized there is a value in all things from this. I was just lying there with my hands and feet in this cool dirt. The shaman walked over and then shut my eyes, and that's when I woke up. The air was fresh, but I had no need to breathe. I had opened my eyes and I felt the comfort of a new place that felt like home. A being of energy talked to me, and he felt loosely human. He walked me down a pathway, and we passed a giant garden with a large cross. It was very simple, but the garden was vibrant, even with the cloudy glow. I was walked up some stairs and taken closer to the giant hall at the end of the path. I noticed that I had felt nothing. No pain, no worry, no doubt, as if the thing I followed I had known my whole life. I looked down at my body and noticed that my scars and tattoos were gone. We stepped into a hall of hundreds of people. The being then spoke to me without having to speak with a body. I was told I passed in my sleep and that I had come to terms with my passing. I felt like I was deeply saddened, but all I wanted to do was try to contact my family and let them know heaven existed. But then the being spoke to me and said there aren't many rules, but speaking to the living is not allowed. I had no longer had a way of talking to my loved ones and friends, and it hurt so bad. But the being assured me that we'd all have a way to meet once they passed, and this is where. He gave me options. I could visit past relatives or friends who are gone, and talk to the people in the common area. I then asked around about anyone knowing how to contact the living, but everyone said we can't do that. That's not how it works here. So I began to accept it, and just started talking to the being, and he said I can do anything on earth here, just can't contact the living. I wondered, and didn't speak to anyone, but saw the endless hall filled with people, and couldn't shake the feeling I wanted to talk to the living. I was on the way to talk again with the being that I had met when I got here, and I could hear a voice call to me. It was louder than all the noise in the room. It was my dad's voice. He was yelling for me to wake up, and when the being saw I could hear it, he came to me instantly and told me to ignore it. I could feel my body again slowly as I took in the noise, and the creature kept yelling at me not to listen. I woke up, and to this day can remember the feeling of all the air return to my lungs and the pain in my body come back as I woke up. I can't shake the feeling I died in my sleep that night. Be warned, the content you are about to read is highly graphic. Being a part of an Italian class titled Dante's Inferno by day, at nightfall a few nights ago I fell into my own inferno. As my eyelids began to fall and my imagination began to drift, I found myself standing in front of a dark forest, unaware of my surroundings. Once I entered, I did not know I was dreaming, but merely thought I was in the very midst of hell itself, having recognized this scene from the poem I had been reading in class. The figure that replaced Dante Alighieri's guide in my own dream, however, was none other than my Italian professor. I had so many things that I had to ask him that I was thinking about in the moment, but as soon as I opened my mouth, another thought came out. Did I do badly on the midterm? As I'm on the verge of descending into my own hell, this is all I can think about. I really must be the typical Stanford student. As I reach the gates of hell with my guide, I realize that this hell is not just for those who have committed serious sins against God and others, but also my own ideals of what hell is in itself. As I enter the first level, I see a large group of students in an eerie setting, all reading some sort of book that I cannot see the cover of. This, said my professor, is the circle of IHUM, where those who do not do well are sent and forced to write IHUM papers for the rest of eternity. Phew, I thought to myself, good thing I did well in IHUM. I descend into the lower level of hell, and I am faced with a desert setting. The sands littered with blue and gold paint. The people in this level are those false worshippers, said my guide. They do not follow what is right and good. I noticed these people had go bears burned into their flesh, as real-life bears were chasing them in a constant circle. Is this some kind of joke? I thought to myself. I quickly realized my thoughts were not silent, as my professor says to me, "This is real, and this is a place you do not ever want to be." We began to descend lower into the depths when I noticed a small group of people in a ditch, reading the very poem that I was studying in class at the time. What sins did these people commit? I asked. He responded, "These unfortunate souls were those who did not pass my midterm. Unfortunately, you are destined to join them." As he pushes me into the depths, and I see the inferno climbing nearer, I wake up. Fortunately, my nightmare was merely anxiety, for even though I was destined to join them, those who did not pass the midterm, I did in fact receive a high grade. Thank God my nightmare was only in my dream.